begin our report with Vice President Kamala Harris consolidating support in the Democratic Party. Since President Biden announced Sunday he is no longer seeking re-election in the 2024 race, Harris has emerged as the only person seeking to replace him. After Biden's endorsement Sunday, a steady flow of endorsements has followed. A majority of Democratic lawmakers in the House and Senate have voiced support, as have all 23 Democratic governors. On Monday, Harris secured the endorsement from some key members of party leadership, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who said, quote, "I have full confidence that she will lead us to victory in November." Biden said he plans to address the nation about his decision later this week. He's still recovering from COVID, but he was able to call into his campaign headquarters in Delaware to thank his campaign team as it moves forward.
The name has changed at the top of the ticket, but the mission hasn't changed at all. And by the way, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be out there in the campaign with her, with Kamala. I'm going to be working like hell, both as a sitting president, getting legislation passed, as well as in campaigning.
Vice President Harris was quick to take up the post of targeting the Republican nominee.
Before I was elected as vice president, before I was elected as United States Senator, I was the elected Attorney General, as I've mentioned, of California. And before that, I was a courtroom prosecutor. In those roles, I took on perpetrators of all kinds. Predators who abused women. Fraudsters who ripped off consumers. Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain. So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type. And in this campaign, I will proudly put my record against his.
And CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now. So, Ed, that was the locker room speech from the new candidate at the top of the ticket. I was struck when Vice President Harris talked about the defining goal of my presidency, new language for her, since I guess she was a primary candidate. What did you make of that speech?
And, you know, John, not only that she said it, but she said it so declaratively, so comfortably. Even President Biden was talking about if I get reelected. She's talking about when I'm president. And that attack on former President Trump, so much clearer, more succinct, more urgent, more relevant maybe to a lot of voters. So she talked about her recent record as an attorney general in California, prosecuting people who defrauded people who went to for-profit colleges, turning around and saying Donald Trump used to run a for-profit college. Prosecuted sexual abusers. He's a sexual abuser, at least an alleged one. You know, that kind of more succinct, clear, biting attack on the opponent is something, with all due respect, that the current president's not been capable of delivering, at least not as succinctly. So it's an immediate jolt of energy and a redefinition of what it is to be a Democrat trying to take on Donald Trump. What we should be listening for, and what will be interesting to see, is what is her argument for what she would do beyond sort of baseline and basic economic help the middle class arguments. Will there ever be anything slightly different than what Biden was planning to do or would have done? Will there be some other piece of legislation or domestic policy she introduces? Because as our polling has shown, people know the difference between Trump and the alternative. There's a desire to hear about what more they might do. But either way, right now, it's a pretty sharp start.
What are some of the big challenges for her at the moment, or some of the decisions she has to make? And you can't answer Vice President because I'm going to ask you about that next.
That's fair. And one of the big ones is she had to go to Wilmington today, where headquarters is, to basically assuage the concerns of the staff about who's doing what and who's staying put. And the word is that essentially if you had a job, you still have one. She has asked Jen O'Malley Dillon and Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who were leading the Biden campaign, to lead the Harris campaign going forward. We should anticipate there'll be some other tweaks. She's got to reach out to constituencies that may have been more loyal or more familiar with the president and are going to be critical. I think of organized labor as one. She has a relationship with them, but not as deep-rooted as the president's. She has to reach out to progressives. I know you're talking to Senator Bernie Sanders a little later. There are some concerns lingering from the 2020 campaign about really how liberal she is in the view of many Democrats. Remember, she was a prosecutor. She was someone who at times had cast herself as a more mainstream Democrat. So she's going to have to reach out to them. And I remember a column that our colleague, our friend Peggy Noonan wrote several years ago, John, where she suggested that given that she had been district attorney of San Francisco, Attorney General of California, and easily elected to the Senate, that perhaps Kamala Harris didn't quite know how to speak Republican, in that she's never had to really reach out to voters on the other side and convince them to vote for her. Let's see if there's something she does about that in the coming weeks.
Now to the vice presidential question. I mean, pick that up wherever you want, Ed. I mean, on the one hand, they have to build an entire vetting and selection process, which a re-election campaign doesn't normally need to do. So now they got to install that. And then is there some thinking about what kind of a pick she needs? All highly speculative, but what's your take on the vice presidential process and pick?
The general consensus in talking to sources over the last several weeks, as this inevitable suddenly became true in the last day or so, is that it has to be a white man, preferably someone with real government or business experience, and ideally, in the eyes of many, someone who's a little more moderate or at least palatable in parts of the country where the concept of a woman and someone like her, who's not that popular necessarily outside of the Democratic Party, can go and campaign. So yes, it's the list that we've been showing people: governors, senators, Mark Kelly, most especially out of Arizona, Josh Shapiro, Andy Beshear, and Roy Cooper out of North Carolina. It wouldn't hurt if one of them came from a battleground. Yeah. That collection there essentially does. We'll see in the coming days. We know that former Attorney General Eric Holder, who served as Attorney General for Barack Obama over at the law firm Covington and Burling, will lead the vetting for her. They've done this before. We should expect it'll move pretty quickly.
Ed O'Keefe in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Thank you, Ed.